Hey, thanks for coming everyone. I'm Dean. So I am a pharmacist by background. I'm part of DSI London and I'm a News Matrix Fellow. I'm going to talk to you today about network states. Network states are a new vision of the future for how to better reorganize society. It's a book written by Balaji Srinivasan in 2022, which is free to read at thenetworkstate.com. I'm going to talk a bit more about it, the historical background, where we're at today, and how it relates to DSI. Okay, put your hand up if
When we slide,
believe that the current government always acts in your best interests all of the time. If anyone did put their hands up, I'd have to politely escort you off the premises. So these are historically unpopular numbers. The global dissatisfaction with commodity is at a record high. The G7 summit was the most unpopular summit ever. And so, yeah, the current system is highly flawed and it's increasingly unrepresentative of what people desire, what people want. And so there's an imperative among us to create new and better collectives. And it doesn't mean that democracy itself is bad. There's good things that we can take from democracy. For example, the governance of the masses, but we can take the good bits and include it in a new version of democracy that's fairer for everyone and internet first. So the network state is, it's a new model for society, and it's around society being digital first. So when we think about how society has accelerated over the last few years, everything has accelerated, but the things that haven't accelerated are the definitions that the formal organizations that we use around a nation state, a corporation, a university. These are all centuries old organizations that don't make sense in today's world where we are internet first, we're digitally native world. So this is the idea that the network state aims to discuss and talk about. So the idea is, if you're tired of the incompetence of our government and centralized authorities, start a new country. It's actually easier to start a new country than it is to reform the current establishments. So the next slide here is a formal definition of the network state, which is it's a highly aligned online community that has a capacity for collective action, that crowdfunds territory around the world and then eventually gains diplomatic recognition. So it's a long description, but what it's essentially saying is a network state begins as an online community, and then once it grows, it eventually crowdfunds territory around the world, and then eventually tries to negotiate for some kind of status. That is the definition of a network state. Thank you, man. Sorry about the issues. So even though that definition of having an online community, growing, crowdfunding territory, and then negotiating with nation states to gain diplomatic recognition, that's not easy, but it's still easier than reforming the current establishments that we have today. So for example, we created Bitcoin instead of reforming global central banks. How hard Bitcoin was to create, it was still easier to reform the global monetary system by creating Bitcoin than it was to reform the global central banks. So the idea is we can create network states to reform current democracies instead of, we can create network states to replace current democracies instead of trying to reform the current democracies. So the context, what I want to talk about is the context for why this is happening now. Why has a movement around network states happened today? Software already allows you to start your own company, right? In the 1990s, you could start your own company. And then in the 2000s, you could start your own community with Facebook, right? So in the 90s, you could start your company with, for example, Google. In the 2000s, you could start your own community. So for example, on Facebook. In the 2010s, you could create your own currency, right, with Ethereum. So what's next is you can create your own country, right? So and network states are an emergent phenomena because we worked out how to create money on the internet. So social media networks and crypto networks are emergent phenomena of the internet. right? But now network states are an emergent phenomena that combines these social networks with crypto networks. So this slide here talks about the historical background. So at the top here is a timeline from the progression of how we lived as states, from city-states from 3000 BC all the way up to today. And at the bottom here, these are the three dominant authorities for what controlled human behavior over time. Thomas Hobbes called these the Leviathans, right? And it's God, state, and the network. So I'm going to talk about that in a minute. What I want to do is talk about the beginning at the top here. So we went from city-states in 3000 BC and the progression from empires to network states. This largely happened because of an advancement in communication technology. Well, communication technology advancement is the point here. In the 1400s, something happened called the printing press, right? The printing press allowed a dissemination of ideas through pamphlets, newspapers, and before that, the only way people got their ideas was through the verbal sayings of the monarchy, of the king. And that mechanism was what they used to stay in power. But when the printing press arrived, it allowed a dissemination of ideas, right? And the important point here is power is dominated by who controls hearts and minds. Whoever can control hearts and minds has power. So when the printing press arrived, it meant that new ideas, liberal ideas, could be spread amongst the masses and win over their hearts and minds. And what that meant is political revolutions could happen. So we moved from wiping out the monarchies, wiping out city-states and empires, up until 1648, where something called the Treaty of Westphalia happened. The Treaty of Westphalia is a treaty that established the modern nation state as we see it today. It created a top-down government and geographical borders, which is what the nation state is. And in 1989 is the internet inflection point. So when we're talking about the advancement of communication technologies, 1989 with the internet caused a massive explosion of ideas. And like I said, power is controlled by who can win the most hearts and minds. So we saw that with the proliferation of the internet, with things like the Arab Spring, the Trump campaign, Brexit. These are examples of how we could use advancements in communication to overtake global power structures, right? We could use our networks to overcome global power structures. So that's where we're at right now. And then for the bottom, so like I said, these are the three dominant forces that represented different sources of authority over time. So God is the OG form of authority. Back in the day with God, people only decided to act. This is a major reason why people decided to act was because of fear of punishment or reward from God. Right, but in the 1800s, Nietzsche said God is dead. Right, faith in God was beginning to decline in the 1800s, and the nation state came in and became the the dominant form of authority. So people's behavior was largely shaped around fear of the states and political power coming in to address it. But today, the belief in God and the belief in the state is both declining. And what's emerging is the emergent technological authorities of the network. So to summarize this, the God-abiding man does not steal because he's afraid of eternal punishment. The state-abiding person doesn't steal because they're afraid that the government are going to punish them. The network-abiding person doesn't steal because the encrypted network won't let them. So what I want to do is expand a bit more on nation states versus network states, the network versus the state. This is currently the dichotomy that we're in right now. So yeah, we use the term nation state today, but they're two different ideas. A nation is is essentially a community. It's not necessarily dictated by territory. A nation is just an idea in people's heads. And a state is the system of law that controls the nation, right? So you can have a nation without a state. So, for example, Kurdish, the Catalonians, these are examples of nations without states. And when a nation does have a state, it means that it's geography first, belief secondary. So the example is Russia, right? They originally had the belief of communism, but when the fall of the Soviet Union happened, the belief swapped to globalism. So the belief changed, but the geographical location stayed the same. The difference is with a network state, the belief is first and the geography is second. So, for example, Vitalia, which is a longevity based network state that I'm going to talk more about, they believe in the advancement of biotech and longevity acceleration, right? And the people who believe in this are from all around the world. The current Vitalia like startup network state is based in Honduras, but it doesn't have to be there. You know, it's just there because that's where they've managed to get the land. But the idea is the people who believe in it are from all different nationalities, and the belief is first, and the geography is second. So what I'm saying is, around a large group of people being organized by a shared belief first, this already exists. This is already on the internet with Facebook groups, with subreddits, right? But the difference is, in a network state, they have blockchains, right? They're supercharged by blockchains. Blockchains give online communities superpowers. So this is what I want to talk about with blockchains. So blockchains are the ideal base infrastructure for network states. So when we think about the original justification for nation states, for the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648, the idea of a nation state was the nation will protect your property. Guys with guns will come and protect your shit. But the difference is I think that's still needed, by the way. It's still important. But with a network, the difference is that the property rights are protected by encryption. And with encryption, you create a blockchain border that can't be busted. Like I was saying, the network abiding person cannot steal because the encrypted network won't let them. And so a nation state, if I was going to try and start my own nation state, another nation state would just send their army in and batter me. But with a network state, nation states, it's a lot harder for them to be able to squash any new network states because of blockchain borders, because of encryption. Networks cannot be nuked. That's the point. It used to be that the people who control the guns, the violence, have power. But over the internet, this is not possible. And so, because of this, the network can resist the nation state. And the examples are apparent so far. So, even with social networks, it's outside government controlled media, state controlled media that's used to influence people. That's social networks, but even encrypted networks, blockchain networks. Bitcoin is outside government control, so they can't. It's resistant to inflation. I guarantee you, if the government managed to get their hands on Bitcoin, first thing they do is, if they could control it, they print more. But you can't do that. And strong encryption prevents governments from accessing communications, encrypted communications, and accessing encrypted digital assets. So this is how the network is resistant to nations. And the other point is, blockchains are public goods, right? They're internet native property rights registries, which I'll talk about a bit later on. essentially, because they can encode rules for ownership, verification, and exchange, it means that you can organize a society. You can record transaction, store money, store identities, all on a global scale in an open network that isn't controlled by anyone. So it means that we can enable coordination across the world in a way that we haven't seen before. So these 7 components here are the primitives that can create network states. So firstly, it's the constitution for digital freedom, right? Blockchain communities stand for openness, freedom, censorship resistance, governance from the commons. This is a constitution for digital freedom. Secondly, is it says Ethereum property rights, but it doesn't have to be Ethereum. It's any blockchain, property rights, smart contract law instead of like current paper-based law or like nation-state law. What this means is blockchains can be the final settlement layer. What blockchains are trying to do is create a new root, and by that I mean corporations are not a root. If there's a dispute within a corporation, it gets settled by the national court system, right? But what blockchains are trying to do is be the layer of authority that has final settlement for dispute resolution. So this is why it's the ideal base infrastructure, because you can use it as the settlement layer for payments, but even for votes, right? The same technology that can secure a coin can secure a vote. So it opens up the door for digital elections, techno democracies, and ETH or BTC, essentially any crypto-backed currency. The idea here is, say for example, Ethereum is the base currency for a network state. Your Ethereum address is your new version of a national insurance number or a social security number. And then a DeFi banking system instead of traditional finance system, and then DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations for capital formation. So if anyone hasn't heard of DAOs, these are online communities that are coordinated in a way that you can better work together and get fairly remunerated for your efforts. And then UN recognition later. So what that refers to is at the end where you get diplomatic recognition, but it's a long way away. No one's there yet. So this is ecosystem map of startup societies. I'm going to talk a bit more about some individual ones in detail. But yeah, this is the map. And so these are the steps to formulate and create your network state. Right, it starts with an idea, a shared idea that everyone can get behind, and the community starts online. That's the key. And a startup society forms where you have basic governance. So most projects in this ecosystem map are still stuck in 1 and 2. Like that's honestly where they are. There's a couple that have gone to 3 and 4, like Italia, Prospera, which I talked about, but no one has gone past that. So yeah, most projects are around 1 and 2. When you get to number 3, virtual state network state operation, that's when you have more sophisticated governance processes. If an online community gets to level 3, you are essentially a stateless nation. You're like the Kurds, you're like the Catalonians. You have a group of people that are united by a shared belief, and you can crowdfund resources to enable the next step, which is physical territory acquisition. So essentially crowdfunding areas of land where you can materialize on offline and develop further to institutional development. So these are more building institutions to support legal, economic, social systems, and then moving into sovereignty and formal diplomatic recognition. which is getting recognized internationally. And then your state will, if you reach this point, you can essentially participate in global governance and global trade like a normal country would. But like I said, no one is here yet. We'll do some stuff up here. This picture on the right is interesting because it shows the global populations if we included online networks. Facebook has 3 billion people, right? So essentially, it's a network that takes on a state-like property. This is the reason why, by the way, in the 2017, when Mark Zuckerberg wanted to launch Libra, this is the reason why all the network states shut him down, because they knew that if Facebook could, if they could have their own integrated cryptocurrency, they could coordinate on a scale that would make them bigger than any nation. So that's why they got shut down. And yeah, so right now, just like Facebook groups, they can't really coordinate like that because they don't have the primitives, the crypto primitives that I spoke about to superpower them. And if you think about it, individual influencers have 1 million followers plus. So it's not crazy to think about we can create a network state that can have 1 million people in it if individual influencers themselves have 1 million followers. And even just with a few thousand people, you can use the crypto primitives that I spoke about to activate the network and achieve goals that you want to achieve.
Yeah,
Yes.
no, hey, so I know that you mentioned DAOs. So I would argue that DAOs and network states share similar properties. So, in your opinion, what would a network state be that's like? What would be the objective that makes a network state that is differentiates from a DAO?
Yeah, I see that. It's a good question. When you look at the full definition of a network state, it's the fact that they physically crowdfund territory and then materialize offline and then work to engage in some sort of status, international status. I think DAOs are still at like level 3, where they're online first, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I think the other thing that's important to remember is this book was written by Balaji Srinivasan. So Balaji talks about the concept of a network state, but he also kind of gives his own geopolitical perspective. So I don't think you necessarily need to crowdfund a territory offline. You know, if you want to have a network state, in my perspective, you could just exist online and could gain recognition online, which would be the DAO, which would be a DAO, right? But I guess the difference in terms of definition is the fact that there's more of an impetus to materialize offline and gain some substantial
Motivation to go offline and have some.
Want to go in to make that comment to that and answering him. The difference of the DAO, in my opinion, and a nation and a network state, only land but a belief system. DAOs are just transactions. Right? They're at least DAOs that I work at, right? Like it's business, right? Like we have a lending protocol, and I make yield and you make yield. You know, I don't need to like you. I don't need to agree with you. I don't need to agree with you on privacy, but I should in a network state. I would say that's a belief system.
I mean, I would argue that DAOs may share some of those ideologies.
It depends on the DAO itself. Some DAOs at the moment, like women power.
I think a lot of the DAOs are essentially sort of coalesced where they have this they are built on a belief system.
Thank you. I definitely think there's overlap between what you're saying. One way that I like to look at it is if you believe like DAOs are more like business focused, it's similar to like a tech startup, where a tech startup would be focused on technological innovation first and culture second. Well, a startup society of a network state flips that. It's focused on culture first and then technological innovation second. That's how I see it. If you go to the network state website, they've listed maybe about 10 or 15 of the ecosystem. 10 or 15 of these projects are listed on the network state website as like formerly like startup societies. Right, so it began with Zuzalu in 2022. This was the first kind of pop-up city that was created in 2022 in Montenegro, where people came together to explore the idea of network states. And I think a few people that are here have went to that, which is cool. And so yeah, from Zuzalu, after that there was loads of different spin-offs that were happening. One of which is Zoo Village, which happened in Georgia a month ago. That myself and a couple of the fellows went to. It was really interesting experience. And there's a couple of others here, Vitalia and Prospera, that are what I'd call more DeSci focused network states, which I'll talk about in a minute. But what I do want to mention is these may seem quite trivial because they're doing things on a small scale. But if we think about the most revolutionary innovations that happened on the internet, they started small, like Bitcoin, Facebook, YouTube, they all started very small. So, yes. So speaking of seemingly small revolutionary innovations that start out small, this is an invitation from us at DeSci London and Muse Matrix to invite you to Castalia City. That is happening. It's our pop-up city. It's our startup society that's happening in Mexico City between 25th of November and the 15th of December. So yeah, this QR code will take you to the website where you can learn more and yeah, hopefully apply, and we'll see you there.
What's the belief system of this one?
This is centered around DeSci. That's it. Very broad. It's a DeSci focused pop-up city. So what I just want to do is wrap up quickly, but I just want to talk about just quickly a DeSci startup that I've mentioned a few times called Vitalia. And as we are in DeSci London, I think it's important to maybe quickly mention this. So Vitalia was a pop-up city that was for 3 months at the beginning of 2024, but it was successful. It's hugely successful, and it's remained as a permanent jurisdiction based in Honduras, in an island called Roatan. And this is probably the most developed out of all of the startup societies because they've successfully materialized offline in Honduras. The idea behind Vitalia is that progress in longevity is being held back by medical institutions that are centralized and monopolized. It takes 10 years and $500 million to develop new treatments and bring them to market. And it's getting worse, right? It's actually getting worse. Despite all the technological innovations that we've had, for some reason it's getting worse. And this is pictured by Aram's law, which says that the cost doubles every 9 years or so, right? So the same price that we spent to discover 100 drugs 60 years ago now allows us just to discover one. And it's partly because of centralized bureaucracies like the FDA and the MHRA. So this is why one of the reasons why Vitalia have sprung up. And because it's easier to build a new institution than it is to reform the FDA. Yeah, that's the idea. There is also another kind of philosophical idea around longevity being the direction to go into. And it's to do with the fact that what my belief is that the ultimate purpose of technology should be to eliminate mortality and extend longevity. It's because what technology does is it reduces scarcity. That is what technology does. Anytime there's a new technological innovation, it's quicker, it's cheaper, it's better. So if we think about technology reducing scarcity, the ultimate form of scarcity that we have is our mortality, right? Time is the most precious asset. So therefore, technology should be directed towards reducing the scarcity of our most precious asset, which is our time. So this is why I think Vitalia are doing something very important. Vitalia is a jurisdiction within another area called Prospera. So what Prospera is essentially a special economic zone within Honduras that has legal and regulatory flexibility. Right? They have a legal framework that allows more possibilities. So if you're a company and you'd want to be in Vitalia because you have more freedom, essentially. So Vitalia were very successful. They incubated a biotech startup called Minicircle, who had developed a gene therapy called follistatin. Follistatin is a gene therapy that Brian Johnson's taken, and ultimately it aims to increase longevity. This is the important thing about follistatin is that it's not approved by the FDA or the MHRA in the UK. So what it's done is it's opened the door for medical tourism for people to go to Vitalia, and that's the only way you can have it. It costs 20k, so it's a way that Vitalia can generate income, as we were talking about before. And there's a couple of other success stories. So Unlimited Bio have another new gene therapy. So Unlimited Bio were actually incubated from Vitalia. They started in Vitalia and went through the entire process. They were funded 1 million, over 1 million, and gained approval in 6 months from incubated in Vitalia. They've got another gene therapy called VEGF that is used for tissue capillarization. So it can be used for diabetic foot, sarcopenia, hair loss. And then this one is Symbiont Labs. And what they've done is they've created a new industry altogether with medical grade cybernetic implants. And so the idea is you can use implants to help manage disease or for performance tracking. So this is the last slide. And this is, I've nicked this off the Network State website. And this is a vision, essentially, for an idea of what it could look like if say, for example, Vitalia can grow and expand and crowdfund more territories around the world. And you see, like, so for example, we can grow to like 1.7 million people dispersed across the world, where there's decentralized communities where they have the shared moral belief of accelerating longevity. And you can see, look, these are essentially decentralized nodes, like Bitcoin nodes across the world. And it creates this network archipelago of sorts, where borders are connected digitally, decentralized. So that's the idea. So hopefully they can do that if they don't get shut down by the current Honduran government. So yeah, thank you. So you can read the Network State book for free at thenetworkstate.com. You can watch the Network State conference that just happened last week. I backed the whole 10-hour video over the weekend. It was incredible. And the other thing that's happened newly is the Network School has initiated in Singapore. And it's just started, I think, this week. And so it's another thing to explore where they're bringing people together. So you can go to ns.com and apply for that. And then finally, I'm going to put the slides in the Telegram group. And so if you're not already in the Telegram group, jump in there and welcome you there.